This is Anna from NHCSR. I am sticking these field reports into the Series Grower feed to give you some real-time reports from our extension specialists in New England, New York, and the Mid-Atlantic states. Look for links to resources from your extension educators in your region, and do pay very close attention to where these reports are coming from because we will be covering a broad region. Reach out if you need help connecting with local extension specialists. We'll get you hooked up. So, top line reports for July 15th, 2026. Hot and dry conditions are leading to concerns about plant stress as well as nutrient deficiencies. Keep in mind that consistent soil moisture is critical to carrying micronutrients into plants. So even if your soil tests indicated no deficiencies, you may see signs of maybe boron or calcium deficiencies in parts of the plant where those micronutrients weren't taken up by the plant during critical times in growth because of soil moisture. And sometimes it's hard to think back to when that part of the plant where we're seeing those symptoms were new leaves, but what were those moisture conditions like when they were new? And that might explain the weird symptoms you're seeing at the edges of leaves now, or maybe even weird fruit shapes. We're hearing reports of severe thrips pressure in both conventional and organic onion systems. Growers are seeing leaf twisting and curling, which is unusually intense this season. If you are seeing any signs of this kind of damage in your onion crops, it might be too late for those particular onions, and it might be kind of like an uh-oh situation because that twisting and curling is the signs of feeding that happened a couple weeks ago, if not longer, and those thrips have been growing ever since then. And we expect more hot and dry weather, which will favor thrips populations. So you might want to get out there and scout to see if you can prevent further crop loss or avoid crop loss entirely. Best practice for scouting is to inspect your crop weekly, starting at the 4-leaf stage, really. Examine 10 random plants in 10 different areas of the field. Pull those little onion leaves apart and gently count thrips deep inside the inner neck folds. So count up all the adults and the nymphs, calculate the average number of thrips per leaf out of, those 50 plants. For folks who are using conventional pesticides, treatment is recommended when you reach 1 to 3 thrips per leaf. If you are relying on softer materials that are approved for use in organic systems, you should certainly consider treating much earlier at 0.5 to 1 thrips per leaf. Check your regional guides or reach out to a local specialist for help with material selection. And if you suspect chemical resistance, there are plenty of recommendations and there are experts out there who can help you devise a plan for next year. Shifting over to brassica crops, folks in the North Country, so northern New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, this is the time of year that brassica growers are starting to see signs of Swede midge infestations. This is a little fly that laid an egg some time ago, and the resulting caterpillar bored into meristematic tissues. Those are the fast-growing buds on brassicas. So that feeding from the larvae that resulted from the egg is going to cause all sorts of weird-looking distorted growth. So please reach out to local extension services to confirm the presence or absence of this species in your area if you think you're seeing something new in your brassica crops. Staying in brassicas, cross-striped cabbage worm has been reported in Connecticut and New Hampshire. Management recommendations for all the caterpillar species that attack brassicas are pretty much the same. We typically recommend physical exclusion to keep these moths or butterflies from laying eggs on your brassicas, or using biological control using a biopesticide containing Bacillus thuringiensis, or BT. However, this is a migratory species for us in New England, and we are seeing this in more northern areas than we expect or earlier than anticipated in the season. And another thing about cross-striped cabbage worm is it tends to be more gregarious than other species that attack brassicas. So they'll feed in groups while other pests in this complex are usually hanging out alone. So your threshold for taking some kind of control action might be a little lower if this species is part of your brassica pest complex at your farm or garden. We've been having great discussions this week regarding the differences in pest management philosophies between proactive and reactive pest management programs. So by proactive approaches, this could be scheduled applications of pesticides to control an insect population before it reaches an economically threatening population, or applying fungicides as a preventative measure to avoid crop loss to plant disease. Within the integrated pest management or IPM philosophy, I love that, we are basing these action thresholds on well-studied knowledge of the pest and the potential economic losses that could be avoided when you treat. For many folks who take a more reactive approach to pest management, they're really just waiting and seeing if that situation really warrants an action in their guts. Many of these folks are waiting too long to avoid crop loss. And for a lot of folks, that's pretty much on purpose. I am reminded of an old proverb that encourages us to grow enough for the thieves, or plant one seed for the mouse, one seed for the cow, one for the crow, one to rot and one to grow. The saying reflects a philosophy of agrarian coexistence that might be a little out of touch for some operations, but it might fit right in with some other, and especially with some of the more low margin crops that vegetable growers rely on. So what are we talking about here? Cucurbit disease is one example where I think most, large, medium, even small scale growers will take a more proactive approach to managing powdery mildew and downy mildew. These seem to be a big enough problem in the East where we have high humidity that people are out there keeping an eye on that situation and relying on fungicides to slow the progression of these diseases. In hot, dry weather that we're experiencing right now, that might not be on your mind. However, weather patterns are so gosh darn unpredictable, you really never know when downy mildew spores might blow in. This is something we have our eyes on, and we have regional monitors out there raising the alarms. So stay tuned for more information about that. On the other hand, another example where we're not so sure that a proactive approach makes sense for smaller scales, experts are very curious to hear more about what people are actually doing for Cercospora leaf spot on beet greens. It's a very ubiquitous disease in the East, and personally, I expect to see a few Cercospora leaf spots on my beet greens when I buy them locally. When I go to the farmer's market, it's kind of a shibboleth of authenticity for me, at least. Many growers who have the space prefer to plant several successions of beets so that when these spots are showing up on leaves, they simply move along and start harvesting from the next planting. They're growing enough for the thieves. Spraying might not fit into their growing philosophy, but it also might not make economic sense because the time and cost of materials does not pay off compared to the value of the crop that is otherwise lost. For those growers, we encourage them to think about cultural controls and resistant varieties. So, for example, heavy weed pressure in those plantings or even high planting densities can increase the humidity around beet greens that exacerbate fungal infections like Cercospora leaf spot. So, opening up those canopies can help. In terms of resistant varieties, I am including a link in the show notes to a Cornell fact sheet on beets with resistance to Cercospora, as well as some other key beet diseases, if you're thinking about making some changes in your next planting. And if your disease inoculum is quite high in that planting, you might think about rotating out of that field for at least 2 to 3 years before planting beets or Swiss chard in there again. But what do we mean by really high or really bad? Your approach to marketing will ultimately determine this, but you might think about making some changes to your approach if Cercospora is so bad that it's actually killing your plants. This is the time of year where you might notice leaves dying. So you'll see all these spots, maybe covering a good portion of the leaves, and then they die. We kind of think of Cercospora leaf spot infections becoming fatal when it causes 70% or more defoliation across the plant. So the fungus isn't directly killing the plant, but severe leaf loss prevents photosynthesis, starves the plant to death. So once that infection gets into the crown, it's really bad. If you are thinking about taking a more proactive approach to using fungicides on your beet crops, Cornell also has a little online tool that can help you predict infection periods using weather data collected at weather stations across the region. So this is weather stations on farms, not in the middle of a tarmac at an airport. So it's really, really good data. They use predictive modeling to help you determine if you should spray to prevent infections, but you would have to reach out to your local extension professional if you need help determining what to spray. A lot of the research supporting those recommendations was conducted by Sarah Pethybridge and the rest of the team at Cornell. So I'm going to include some resources from her research and a couple comments directly from these papers. So Cercospora leaf spots caused by the fungus Cercospora beticola, and it's one of the most damaging diseases of table beets and sugar beet crops worldwide. So It's causing economic damage to table beets because these disease symptoms are these like little discrete necrotic lesions surrounded by a red to purple margin in a red table beet cultivar. The lesions have a gray center, and the presence of pseudostromata is diagnostic. So little black things in the middle of those lesions. A huge part of their research program is to design durable management programs for Cercospora leaf spot in New York table beet production based on a rotation of fungicides with different site-specific modes of action. The industry standard here is azoxystrobin. So the trade name that we know the best is Quadris. There's several other site-specific fungicides out there, but that's the industry standard. And thinking about price of materials and that industry standard, a gallon of Quadris is pretty affordable, something like $150 for a gallon. And that price point makes sense for folks who have large acreages or are using this product for multiple crops. When we're thinking about organically approved materials, Sarah Prethybridge's research found some good options too. While they don't provide the same level of control as the synthetic industry standard, the best efficacy was achieved when rotating between copper octanoate and a biopesticide containing Bacillus amyloliquefaciens. One example of commercial grade product containing copper octanoate, we also call this copper soap, is Queva. And Queva is pretty affordable, something like $120 for 2.5 gallons. I also think the shelf life on these copper soaps is pretty long. So that's a pretty good price point. There are several over-the-counter, ready-to-use copper products that are out there, and they usually set you back something like $20, but they're for a very small area. They're ready to go, but not very economical compared to people who are buying products for large acreages. So going back to this biopesticide, this Bacillus amyloliquefaciens, it's a beneficial, naturally occurring soil bacterium, and it's a very powerful active ingredient for biofungicide and even bactericides. It protects the plant by rapidly colonizing root and leaf surfaces, outcompeting harmful pathogens for resources and secreting natural antimicrobial compounds like lipopeptides. They destroy fungal spores and inhibit bacterial growth. For those of you who are familiar with the concept of using compost tea as a pesticide, it's the same principle. So there's these commercial products out there that do the same kind of thing without any question marks as to, what else might be in there. Some commercial grade products that contain Bacillus amyloliquefaciens are double nickel, Stargus. There's a ton of them. And it sounds like a lot of your large scale commercial growers are incorporating these materials into their spray rotations, especially if they have a resistance management program. But it sounds like they provide really good control. They're about the same price point for a gallon or a 2.5 gallon size. And they have a 0-day pre-harvest interval because they're biological. So a lot of these farmers are finding huge benefits for trying out these new products because of all these reasons. A word of warning about these products being the same price point as a Quadris or a Queva is that their shelf life is likely not quite as long. So these products do need to be replaced if you don't use them within a couple of years. A gallon of this stuff or a 2.5 gallon size of this might not be appropriate for you. And so there are certainly over-the-counter ready-to-use products out there, again, in the $20 price range. One example is Monterey Complete Disease Control, which is registered for use on fruit and vegetable crops, as well as for a slew of other fungal diseases. So if you're looking for something like that, look for Bacillus amyloliquefaciens on the label. But I'm very curious, do you feel like your current pest management strategy is working, or are you finding that your reactive approach is leading to too much crop loss in high maintenance crops? I really want to know if you want to know more about this stuff. So reach out. That's it for today, but let me know if you have any questions or suggestions for what you'd like to hear more about. And thank you so much for listening.